Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, we got a bunch of rejects here with us, and we got two very, very special guests, both returning. One we just had on, we had Ike Baker on recently, and a while ago for the Goetia, we had Jamie Paul Lamb on. I keep it real, he was one of the few guests that actually made me feel completely ignorant on my own show. The guy was talking about the Goetia and tying it to all this stuff, and I'm just sitting there like, duh. But it was amazing stuff, and I was really happy to get him on again. And I was like, you know what? I got to get Jamie on again. Then I remembered, wait, him and Ike are actually pretty, they're close. I was like, I got to get them both on maybe. And I asked Ike, and he was totally down for it. So very, very excited to have them both here. But before they introduce themselves, I'll have Headless let everybody know what's up with him and where they can find all his work. Oh, you're muted there, sir.
I am muted. How you doing, everybody? I'm the Headless Giant. You can find me on Twitter and YouTube at the Headless Giant. If you have any sort of strange occult experiences, send them to the mailbag at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com, and we will read those on Thursdays. I also have a alchemy show on Mondays and 777 Aleister Crowley's Kabbalah on Tuesdays, and on Sundays I've got the trialogues with Ethan and Ricardo. So check those out. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, sir. And we got Jin. What is going on?
What is up, boss? Mr. 93. So I'm Jin the Ninja. I have a show called Threshold Saints, which I call serial experiments and speculative ontology. So it's about the metaphysics of reality. Obviously, yes, I use a lot of Kabbalah. And special shout out to Ike for hooking me up with that contact. I really appreciate it. That was major for me. So thank you so much, Ike. And of course, Jamie, I've shouted you out many times on this show and my show just for kind of blowing me away and humbling me in a big way. I often call myself the rising Hode-like prince of Kabbalah. You made me feel much more the student that I should have probably approached it as. So thank you so much for that. And if you want to check me out at Threshold Saints, at Threshold Saints on IG and X, or my personal account at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, thresholdsaints.substack.com, as well as thetruegraylodge.com. And of course, Matt Murrah is our webmaster for that, as well as runs our YouTube channel. So that is our group show. And I'm dropping an episode with Greg K today, and in the Hour of Saturn. So watch out for that. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for jumping on. I appreciate it, sir. And we got the branch. What is going on?
Hey guys, it's a pleasure to be here. Sabat Shalom. And I do spaces with Jen and Matt, usually every Friday on X, Twitter. So if you guys want to catch us on there and interact, that's been a lot of fun. We've been doing that for weeks now. Matt then uploads a lot of those episodes to YouTube. So check out the Gray Lodge on YouTube if you want to check out our catalog of our spaces. And of course, Threshold Saints, man, it's a great show. And there's been some recent releases, like you said. So check it out. I really like it too, because you can drive while you're listening to Spotify, So anyway, thanks for being here with me, and I appreciate the invite.
Of course. No, glad you could make it. And we got Matt Moore. What is going on, sir? Glad you're here.
Happy to be here again. So, Matt Murrah, you can find me always as at MattMurrah19. That's on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, maybe some other place. I don't know. And there's also my website. That's Kabbalah.com, KAABALAH.com. A lot of cool stuff there. I'm doing tarot readings now because I'm working on a cool little project. So, I mean, I always did them, but now I'm more focused on them. So if you're interested in being a beta tester, just let me know, DM me in any of these platforms. And yeah, very nice way to start the year. Let's go.
Oh, yeah, right. And I guess, and thank you, Matt, for jumping on. I know it's, where are you right now? Well, you're in Brazil at this point, right?
Yeah, in Brazil now.
Is you starting a cult out there or something, or what?
Not saying it publicly. What do you mean? If I would start one, I wouldn't say it publicly.
Yeah.
So I'll say no.
All right. I guess as guest wise, we'll probably start off with Ike first. Ike, please, sir, let everybody know for the new listeners or people who just never didn't hear the other episode yet. Please let them know who you are and what's up.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This was great. I was really excited when you asked me to talk with Jamie. It's been a minute, and it's always just so much fun to chat with the both of you, actually, everybody here. I had a really good time last time we were on.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, I'm Ike Baker. I guess first and foremost, I would have to say that I'm an author. I wrote Etheric Magic and A Formless Fire. I have a book coming out this year with Inner Traditions called Esoteric Mythology. I host the Arcanum podcast and YouTube channel. I have scholars, practitioners, lots of people on the pod. It just entered its 3rd year. So check me out there. I also do documentary style presentations on esotericism, the occult, philosophy, etc. And my background is Masonic historian, temple chief, and adept of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn under the Ciceros, and Martinism, a bunch of other fun stuff. But yeah, just a general real enthusiasm for occultism, esotericism, primarily magic.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I appreciate having you back on. And last but not least, Jamie, please let everybody know what your deal is when they can find all your amazing work.
My name is Jamie Paul Lamb. I think I've got a delay. Like when I look at my picture, it's like I go like this, and then it's like 5 minutes, or no, it's like a 3. I don't know. Is my voice matching my?
No, but you answered pretty quick, so obviously the
audio. Oh, okay.
The audio sounds good.
Yeah, I guess the video. Anyway, Jamie Paul Lamb. My website is JAIMEPAULLAMB.com, and I'm an astrologer. I'm a Freemason. I'm in some other orders and groups, of Golden Dawn Order and a Rosicrucian Order, and I just had a book come out on Inner Traditions called The Astrological Goetia, 72 Keys to Angelic and Demonic Astrology. That came out in, I want to say, August of 25. So you can get it now. And yeah, basically, I'd like to direct people to my website. I've got all sorts of offerings on there, and a blog that I need to do better about keeping up to date. And I plan on writing some more stuff in the future. But I want to say it's a pleasure to be back. Nick, thanks so much for asking me. Ike, always a pleasure. Everybody else, great to see you again, or to meet you this time. And really looking forward to this conversation.
No, definitely. It was a blast having you on last time. I actually felt so bad. I felt like I really didn't have much to say because you blew my mind, and I really just was like, I didn't know what to say to this. I think Jin kind of felt.
That's what you. That's what you. You're saying that, and Jin said that, and now I'm feeling bad. Like I came on and I was like, had to be a jerk or something.
No. You did exactly what I wish I guess would do more of. So thank you.
It just, I think it kind of blew our minds, Jamie, like how it's you've basically, I told this to Ike live, so it's no surprise to anyone here, but you pioneered like this great work that you've like basically put into the public sphere. So it's kind of incredible, and it is, if you're a magician, or think you are, you look at it in awe. So yeah, I think that's what it was.
Well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I would not have written a single word if I hadn't read some of your books first, man. I mean, that's actually what got us in touch, if you remember. So I was just so completely blown away. But yeah, and your work is getting better every day, man. Every release is, developing that style and that way to communicate stuff like a good teacher.
Oh, you're making me blush. Let's.
Well, good. You got the new beard, so nobody can see it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, Jamie, maybe so you stop blushing, we'll put the spotlight on you. When it comes to astrology, we're going to be talking about astrological magic, I guess. So, the evolution of astrological magic or astrology. What is that even to you, astrology, or astrological magic?
So, yeah, let's take each of those terms, right? Astrology, you could say, is the simply you could say the study of meaningful time, right? That's a good, clean way to put it. Another thing is to say, astrology means a certain thing. When we say astrology, we're talking about something particular. It's not like you can't call, stellar omens and things like that necessarily astrology. When we talk about astrology proper, I think we're talking about planets in signs, in houses, and how they aspect each other. So there's some elements of astrology that make it astrological, right? I mean, it's a Hellenistic sort of invention, right? And taking bits from Mesopotamian proto-astrological omenic uh, auspices and things like that, and their electional and their mundane sort of proto-astrology, and then mixing that with the Egyptian inheritance of timekeeping, the calculation or the consideration of the decans on the horizon, and the very notion of the ascendant, and using that horoscopos to later to cast a figure or a chart. So yeah, and then the magical part, I think, that's something that I was hoping we would, because it's misty where that kind of begins, right? The astrological magic, because you could say these sort of, since we know that in the Akkadian through the Babylonian, Mesopotamian complex of cultures there, at least, they were using electional astrology, when to do things, and mundane astrology. So if they're electing when to do something, then wouldn't that be sort of a magical, because you're sort of harnessing the cosmic momentum of a certain configuration in the planetarily or zodiacally or otherwise, and bringing that down to a terrestrial operation, which I think it's got to be astrological magic. So even though it's proto astrological, I don't know, it's a little misty.
I think I'll just to tack on there. I think the minute you use any kind of technique to so divining or ascertaining and delineating the fate and fortune, so on and so forth, the kairos, the auspicious timing, that's astrology proper, I think, and the study of that science. But when you use a technique to try and alter or change or influence that, or buttress against infortune or misfortune, I think then it can, for me, it's magic at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. So yeah, when we see things like the making of amulets or talismans or things like that, or even setting up apotropaic objects that we know they did that on thresholds and things like that, and the essentially the equivalent of like what we'd think of as like voodoo dolls or something. They had little figures that they would create at certain times that would be imbued with that sort of stellar influence or planetary influence. Yeah.
Right.
Which
if I may,
right, yeah.
If I may mention something as well that I remembered, there's a guy in Brazil that he studied a lot of the like, let's say, folk magic, I'm going to use this term, guys, and how they approach things and so on. And what he would do is, because he was into Kabbalah, he would go to the little sessions going on and write down everything that was asked for the person. Like, you got to go through this place, like the cross place, and then you got to get those ingredients and so on, and around that time do that thing. And then he wrote it down, and then afterwards he checked the correspondences and the astrology, and those would match. Like, it would be a proper like astrological magic, but the person doesn't necessarily knew that, because they were just getting told what to do. The entity or whatever would come and say like, hey, go do this to solve your problem, and then they would go and do it. So it's very nice understanding as well that even if you don't necessarily know exactly the tidbits and bits of what you're doing, it still will work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ike,
Yeah.
I was thinking about you when this crossed my mind earlier about how, of course, there's, in Greek, the word magic, we know that they parse it out a little better than we do in English. You've got thaumaturgy, you've got theurgy, you've got telestiki, you've got
My,
teletai, initiation, goetia, magia, whatever. But what do you think in terms of like say like an astral religion like Mithraism or something, or Hermetism? We know that there's at least that Pymander like component of an ascent, an anagoge or something. Would it be, and the source material better than I do, do you find anything where it's like astrological teletai, or where they would definitely use, like in the Asclepius, the god making stuff? Is
Right.
that astrological, or do we just see things like the discourse on the 8th and 9th with the,
No,
where
I
it
mean,
clearly
it's
says,
yeah, it's I would say that the from the Hellenistic period forward, right? So for I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but just in case, like you just got into this stuff, the Hellenistic period is right around 332 in Egypt, when Alexander the Great conquered it, brought the Greek stuff there, and really modern astrology, or let's say the precursor, or the template for modern astrology, as consisting of the planets, signs, houses, and aspects, those four parts, that first appears. Now, similarly, you have really the first concrete record of what we would consider modern theurgic ceremonial, and the bringing together of all the various colors, incenses. We have a very good record of that kind of stuff from that period. I would say that from the outset, in that period, it must be and also including the technical Hermetica and the philosophical Hermetica. There's always a planetary component, because even when you're doing empsychosis, right, ensouling an object, even when you're doing that, the intermediary, the sort of the distance to be spanned, let's say, I don't know if it's Aristotelian or what, but that chain of causality, that chain of flow, always has to come through the firmament, down through the planets and stuff like that. So I would say there's a very, very strong emphasis throughout the traditions. Even some of the pseudo Aristotelian stuff and pseudo Alexandrian stuff, that they listed the Picatrix, right? The Picatrix says, okay, I collected the work from these guys, these ancient Greeks. He's constantly talking about, it was pseudonymous. It wasn't actually Aristotle talking about, or at least we don't think it is. Scholars don't think it was. But
well, if I could pop in there real quick. So at the Oracle at Delphi, the appearance of the constellation Lyra would signify the coming or going of Apollo, the deity that would speak through the Pythia at the temple. So they certainly had a connection to the times of the year coming through these different constellations and the spiritual properties of those constellations. So, part of the year, Apollo would be there, and then other gods would come in and start speaking through the Pythia, like Athena and Poseidon. So
yeah. Well, and Apollo was a big one, because especially, lyra, right? That means the harp or the lyre. And so it was actually him sitting at his celestial throne above the cosmos, playing the tune that the muses were then singing on the spheres, that orbited the Earth. So that's he would have a very, very big part in that kind of thing as well. But yeah, I think I'm convinced that it was even Iamblichus talks about it. He talks about it like he will sort of disparage And Greg Shaw did an amazing article on this. If anybody wants to get a hold of it, I'll send it to you. He sort of disparaged the use of astrology specifically for sort of telling the future, but he did emphasize its necessity in theurgic, anagoge, ascent. So he was saying like, yeah, we use it for this, not this type of thing. But again, I love Iamblichus. I don't think he's the end all be all about theurgy. I think Porphyry had some incredible insights. They had very different brains,
Yeah, that's interesting. That whole exchange. Well, letter to a Nebo and the mystery, the mysterious, but yeah. So I guess that's part of the thing. Is like, do we call it astrological magic if they're using it to ascend through the 7 planetary spheres, at each of which they would, maybe take on a virtue, give up a vice, up or down, an anabasis, a catabasis. I guess since we're talking about astrological magic, do we want to limit that to purely like talisman making, or things that you actually need to cast a full election for? You have to fully cast a chart for that. Just like natal astrology, using magic in natal astrology, which I do a lot for people, is I'd get maybe the lord of their year, the planetary lord of their year, like what profection they're in, which is a Time Lord technique. And I would get the lord of the house that they're in for that year. And then I would maybe set them up with some sort of synthemata, or, the appropriate colored candle, signatures and tokens in the terrestrial sphere, the appropriate colored candle, the appropriate incense, the appropriate musical mode, like a church mode, a plagal or an authentic mode, and, the appropriate image maybe to set up, and setting up a rudimentary little altar for that deity for that year, so they could, and whether they sort of interface through the archangel of the planet, through the planet itself, sort of, or through the Greco-Roman entity associated with that planet, or the Mesopotamian or Egyptian entity, or however they choose to interact, whether from a pagan perspective, Abrahamic perspective. I mean, you can kind of work around all of that syncretically, right? But yeah, so that's something I definitely call astrological magic. But we also, a big thing, and I think this brings in the Neoplatonic thing, but also the Haranian thing much later, the Sabians of Haran, is this astral religion, which is like, which is soteriological. It's salvific. It has something to do with the condition of the soul, and the soul's existence beyond death. So, and the state of the soul, its cleanliness, its orderliness, whatever. So do we call that astrological magic? That to me, I guess in the loosest sense we do, because it has to do with the celestial sphere and also events on the earth that are tied to that through chains or Siri or whatever. And I don't know.
I think well first I want to just mention this and then kind of pivot. Chris Warnock, who we both know, he has said that he has, in his opinion, the Sabians of Haran had the most sophisticated and complex techniques for astrological magic. So I think that situates them squarely in that tradition. But at least to his mind. But I would say the main issue, right? Okay, so like we defined astrology pretty succinctly. So what needs to be said about magic is that it's a bracket term that everybody uses differently, or I would say almost everybody will have some shade, some flavor of difference in their definition. I mean, if you ask somebody who just joined, I don't know, a Wiccan coven, and somebody who's been in the Golden Dawn for 3 weeks, and then you talk to some solo practitioner, in the forest in Germany, who's been like reconstructing PGM spells for 30 years, or whatever. Like, they're all gonna have a different idea of what magic is, and so much of it is really in the phenomenology. It's in the actual experience of doing the ritual, and then the way that the universe speaks back to you, and you know, you get to test and see your results. But I would say, yeah, to Jamie's point, we're talking about magic as distinct. Let's you know, I like the Greek sort of wealth of terminology, but maybe let's boil it down for the sake of making it manageable in a conversation. You have, and this comes down to, you know, what really Skinner was the guy who set this in motion with his techniques of Greco-Egyptian magic. That was his doctoral thesis, and he starts saying, yeah, well, you can't call everything in here magic, because to him, religious stuff that we're talking about, the anagogic stuff, like for instance, for him, the Mithras liturgy, right, and this kind of vision of ascent, and the sort of taking in of the rays of Helios that we find in the Mithras liturgy. For him, for Skinner, it's not that's not magic. Magic for him is different. But I would say that we have magic as a technology, or a techne. It's a craft. Magic is a technology. You can use it for sorcery. You can use it for conjuration. You can use it to commune with angelic forces or elemental forces. But I would say that on the simplest kind of pole you have, let's maybe talk about it in like an Agrippan context. You have elemental or natural magic. That a lot of that is what's going to be more familiar to Wiccans and to people that are more, I would say, of a nature-based sort of thing. You have you know, celestial magic, which I think works both ways. And then you have you know, I would include the divine magic, obviously incorporating the celestial, because that's kind of, so to speak, analogically how you get there. That's theurgic in nature, which is, you know, for me, theurgy can be defined as not just God working, but let's say a more practical definition could be, and you tell me if you agree with this, the technology of magic applied to spiritual ascent, or let's say the evolution of the soul.
Yeah, I mean, I think as differentiated from something like theoria, which is just contemplative, right? So as opposed to being this contemplative philosophical exercise, theurgy could, I think, be considered, because of things like synthemata and symbola, which are signatures and tokens, and these correspondences and virtues, as Agrippa would say, in the sublunary sphere where we are, the earth and the elements and things. But yeah, theurgy as a techne, making use of these sort of possibilities through the chain of being, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that I think is worth talking about, is all of these people from the ancient Greeks and, you know, the Hellenistic period all the way through the medieval Perso-Arabic, the Renaissance, particularly people like Ficino and Agrippa after him. All of these people are making use of a chain. And Ike, you were just kind of talking about it a few minutes ago, how, you know, things sort of, if we're working with the gods, let's say, they're beyond the fixed stars in the zodiac. They're beyond the firmament, the canopy of the stars. So when we're dealing with them, we're trying to, theurgically particularly, we're drawing down. So we have to have sympathetic, resonant sort of attractors down here, depending on which chain or series or seri that we're operating with. So typically you go through each of the 7 visible planets. The ancients knew 7 planets that were visible, and they called the luminaries planets as well. The luminaries being the sun and the moon. They're considered planets because they wander. They don't follow the fixed stars in the zodiac. They move against that canopy. In fact, in the other direction. So that's Plato's the different and the same, you know. Anyway, but you figure out what the operation is. I think this is definitely worth talking about. This is Astrological Magic 101. This is bedrock here. Is like you figure out what operation you want to do, and let's say it's a love you're making a love talisman. You want somebody to fall in love with you. Clearly, you go through Venus, right? Goddess of love, Aphrodite, Ishtar, whatever. And you so for me, I use the color green, which is a queen scale golden dawn thing. I just like the color green for Venus, and it's like the copper turns green when it's exposed to the air or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So so then you would use the appropriate, like frankincense is one you can use. In fact, the Orphic hymns, I think, for Venus says frankincense. Green candle, maybe a green altar cloth. You might use rose petals are nice for a couple of reasons, because roses are Venusian, but also petals themselves are Venusian. They're the Venusian part of the plant. Whereas the thorns would be the martial part, and the if there's any berries, they would be the Jupiterian part. The sap would be solar. You know what I mean? So you stack all these synthemata or synthemata, and that attracts that engages that chain, that golden chain. That connects. You're going through Venus to the sort of idea of Venus, the form of Venus beyond the fixed stars in the zodiac, this Enneatic sort of this noetic Venus, right? Just like Plato's forms are up there. They're intellectual sort of entities, right? So, and you're using this planet Venus as sort of an intermediary. And just as the sun is considered like the heart in man, the sun is like in between this noetic sun, this noetic light, and man's heart, which is the sun inside of man. And it's, so there's this mesocosmic activity that's planetary. And I think that's important to say, is like when you do an astrological magical operation, you're engaging whatever chain that is, depending on the want or need of the magician.
Yeah. And I think an important part in that probably most people don't even need to know, but I'd say if you're working like me in a bit of a little bit more of a Neoplatonic or theurgic milieu, the planets themselves, the physical, the mundane spheres of the planets are technically considered the bodies of the gods. This is one of the sticking points that Porphyry has, or at least ostensibly he has, with Iamblichus. He writes to him and he basically says, okay, so spiritual beings aren't supposed to have bodies. Things that have bodies are lower on the totem pole. So, I mean, a daimon has like an ethereal body. So you're telling me that if a god's body is the planet, then it's got to be lower on that scale than a daimon. And Iamblichus kind of claps back and he's like, we are tethered. Our souls are tethered to our bodies. They're not in that position. They move their bodies intellectually from afar. So it's very much so like a physical, an actual mundane grounding point that noetic intelligence of the god is like at a distance, setting to order. And I think that's a huge part of talking about this, is talking about how, the main thing, even working with something in like the Hermetic text, the main reason why there's this preoccupation with astrology in Magick is because it's literally, it is the being of the cosmos. It is the wheel work of existence. And, I've said it before, the ancients didn't have digital clocks. They didn't have wall clocks. It was, all the way back, let's say in prehistory, you'd go outside. What determines like whether or not you should stay awake or go to sleep? Where the sun is. What determines whether or not you should keep warm or take layers off, where the sun is. What determines whether or not like the tide is going to swell and you may drown? The moon. So all of the apparent causality, it appeared to them to be all up there. Like, so this gigantic machine could be viewed in motion and we could see its effects here. So that's, I think that's really, really important also for grounding, for grounding. I think the person is trying to wrap their head around astrology and magic, is getting them into that worldview of understanding, like, they were trying to observe, like, why is this stuff changing? Why are these patterns existing? And we could go and do a whole side tangent about the underlying why, but I think a better kind of pivot would be maybe I'd like to ask Jamie, like, if I have it right, sort of the astrological practice really starts with Omenic and mundane astrology in ancient Iranian region, correct? Mesopotamia.
Yeah, they had like regal astrology. Basically, astrology wasn't for individuals. It was for the king and for the kingdom. It was a royal art that was used specifically for that. It didn't become sort of natalized, or individualized until the Hellenistic era. In fact, I want to say the first chart that we have is like 410 BCE is the first nativity that we found, a Hellenistic nativity. So one thing though that you made me think of, I like this idea of the demonstrable causal effects of the planets, and that being something that clearly the ancients saw and definitely informed some of their early conception of astrology, or at least Omenic proto-astrology. There's also this idea of the moon throughout astrology being the distributor, and I love this idea, and it's something that I think even astrological magicians sometimes, definitely at their peril, avoid, is the importance of the moon in a chart. Whether, like, let's say, like my example before, you're working on a Venus talisman or something. If that moon is waning, then the love is waning. The position of the moon and the condition of the moon is really important. And simply because, bringing Aristotle back into it, and Ptolemy, because through him, but how when that effluence, and I never use the word energy here because it's metaphysical, it's not physical. We're talking about metaphysics here, not physics. When that effluence is coming down through the 7 planetary spheres and taking on its coloration at each of those, or its accretions, just like a human soul does when it comes down through the spheres, see the myth of Ur, or etc. At the sphere of the moon, the sublunary sphere, the moon herself, she's the nurse of the earth. She's the distributor. She's the dispenser of fortune down here. She's the fastest moving planet, air quotes, and she distributes. So it's very important that no matter what the operation is, whether it's a wealth Jupiterian thing, whether it's a might, a Mars thing, aggression, or some war, bellicose sort of operation, whether it's transportation, communication, mercurial, whatever it is, you want the moon to reflect that operation symbolically. If you're giving up smoking, you want a waning moon. Like tobacco's ruled by Mars. So if you have Mars in a bad placement for Mars, and you have a waning moon, that might help you, if, along with other factors, that might help you to create a talisman for non-smoking. Just off the top of my head, something like that. But that's the basic nuts and bolts. Yeah.
Jamie, a good example is the Orphic hymns. You can find in there, they're talking about blessing these rites. So, in a lot of ways, you could see the Orphic hymns being a part of this sort of magic. And they describe exactly what you're talking about with the different gods, goddesses, planets all together, sort of being sung about in a way that is supposed to be a blessing on the rites that they're performing. So,
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I use them all the time. The Thomas Taylor ones.
Yeah.
All the, like
Okay,
pretty much every operation I do, I use those.
And the thing is too, you know, according to that, the ancient rationale, the sublunary sphere is the only thing that can change. You know, so that's everything else is entirely ordered and unerring. Even though they have, you know, retrograde motion and it's erratic, it's still predictable. But everything from the moon down is what is acted upon. But yeah, you look at like Lily. You look at Lily's you know, I think book 2 of Christian astrology is all his horary stuff. He's got this thing that we use in the Golden Dawn. We use Lily's considerations before judgment. When you look at a horary, and the main thing that he's driving home is like, you know, Nick, can I swear?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Don't read this chart if the moon is fucked. You know,
Right.
like it's like if you're trying to do electional or horary, and he's got the via combusta. I think the general thing is like if the moon or the you know, the planet, the Lord of the significator is between 15 degrees of Scorpio and Libra, don't do anything. But really the main emphasis in his considerations is the moon. And I've always found that interesting to kind of tack on a little bit to what HG Wells up there was saying was, you know, they, particularly in theurgy, they looked at Hecate as the goddess, the triform goddess of magic, and she was a central. She was the main god or deity for the you know, the particularly the late antique theurgists. Algisus Divinis talks about that quite a bit. And they corresponded her to the moon, like the, you know, the not just the dark moon, but the moon in all of her aspect, because she's triform. So that's always been Hecate has always been an interesting interface for the moon for me.
I have a quick
Yeah, she's in the Oracle, the Chaldean oracles, right?
Yes, yeah, she's the formless fire actually that they talk about. But.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Oh, go ahead.
Apologies. I have a question, I guess, for both Jamie and Ike, if you can field it however you want. It's a bit a normie question because obviously I look from Asia, like obviously Tantric Buddhism and Taoism and like East Asian sort of ontologies much more concretely than anything. Then I'm not really familiar with the Greek stuff, as I've told Ike many times. So, but you know, Jamie, how do they reconcile the later sort of Mughalized Persian texts that include the 9 luminaries of like the Artavadas, like including Rahu Ketu? How is there a way to reconcile that, like with Western magic, or without necessarily including the outer 3? Or I'm very comfortable using the outer 3. Like I like Uranus for Rahu, and Ketu is obviously Neptunian in a way, and so I'm comfortable doing that. But some people are not. Is there like a way that either of you sort of reconcile those cosmologies? And I think it also ties in with the moon, of course, because you know, so many of the systems use that 9 planetary model, or at least the kind of idea. And like I brought up the sublunary, like changing that world. Well, definitely the Yesod, or the moon, is definitely the place for reconciliation, rectification, and like bringing things together that, you know, come off the sun, you could say.
Yeah.
I mean,
so the lunar nodes.
Oh, sorry,
Go
go
on.
ahead.
No, please go.
Well, I was going to say, I don't if we're talking like Rahu Ketu type of thing, that now I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, are we getting into the Vedic terminology for that stuff?
So I practice tantric astrology, so it's very different. It's much closer to like Sefer Yetzirah. Like it's more the planetary bodies or the grahas, the graspers,
Mhm.
they're really in a cosmological position of like minor archons is how we would understand it. So there are ways to appease them, or in some cases, like the more deeper into tantra that you go, whether Indian or Buddhist, there are ways to completely clear negative planetary charts, as I've heard Ike talk about in more Hellenistic terms before. So yes, it is the north and south node of the moon, but they
Right.
actually are considered like luminaries. Like they're considered to be in the physical sky. They're just shadow planets, and so I think you can liken them also to the outer the two of the outer three that I mentioned. But I also you have to kind of understand like how they work with certain deities, because there's very few deities that can clear Rahu Ketu. Rahu particularly loves to be both Venus and Shani or Saturn. Like he loves to pretend to be those two things because those are very densifying kinds of planets, like to bring things into material reality. And Ketu loves to be both. I always think of it as like Hesed and Gevurah, but Mars and Jupiter. Because Mars is like the annihilating flame, right? So he likes to bring people there so they kind of annihilate, because that's what Ketu's real desire is, to get out of the form.
Well, I would say this. I don't work with the Vedic or the Jyotish model. I'm not familiar with it. It's not. I've found that I have found what I need in the Western model of 7 planetary spheres or 7 planets, 8 spheres, 9 depending, and the I would say predominantly Western model of ascent. What you're talking about sounds very fascinating, but I'm interested to know if Jamie's got a little bit more footing in that world.
Well, I know Rahu and Ketu, as far as I know. I'm no expert on Jyotish or Vedic astrology, but I recognize them as the lunar nodes, and I don't know them any other way. But the lunar nodes in Hellenistic astrology, in traditional astrology, let's say all the way through to the Elizabethan era with Lily, is the lunar nodes are essentially, you might say, the north lunar node turns up the volume. It's sort of not a predominator, but it kind of it increases. It tends to increase, whereas the south lunar node tends to decrease. So if you have a planet conjunct the Jupiter, let's say, Jupiter conjunct the north node, it's going to turn up the Jupiter vibes a little bit, to put it colloquially. Whereas the south node is going to turn down the volume on that planet's expression. Now, of course, that's tempered by other things. If you get Jupiter in Cancer where he's exalted, then and you got and he's conjunct the north lunar node, you're going to get Jupiter to the max pretty much. So it's like there's other factors, and then you got aspects to look at, and you got his dispositor to look at, and is he in aspect to his dispositor. There's just a million things to look at. You could literally drive yourself crazy. And so that's one thing. But then there's and you could drive yourself crazy with elections. Like I want to elect a good time to brush my teeth. Oh, I got to elect a good time to leave the house or I'm fucked. My whole life is ruined. I could see if it's a wedding or a job interview, but some people get into the weeds where it's like, you don't need to elect for that, man. I mean, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. And even sometimes if you do elect, things will happen and then you have to reschedule. Like, let's say for a job interview or something, you elected and then it gets to the time, the guys have to reschedule for whatever reason. So
you should be able to see that in the chart, though.
Yeah, you should. But
I've done a bunch of electional over the last couple of years, and you do drive yourself nuts. But here's the comforting thing, and this is how I look at also, this is how, and a lot of like somebody like Jamie who does astrology professionally, full, for what I would consider to be like full time for somebody who's now retired, but they're gonna approach it way differently than me. I know because I've driven myself nuts so many times. Like, limitations are actually good. limitations are good, because what they do is they subordinate this kind of lust that we have for, if you're trying to do a magic ritual and elect for something, you obviously have a lot of skin in the game. You've got a lot, you're in it, you're invested, you're doing a ritual for it. But that those sort of impediments and those inhibitions to you getting exactly what you want, I think are actually a good thing. They leave, right? Because part of magic is learning how free will and determinism intersect. And I think that they can really, really benefit each other. Free will without any four walls around it, we know what that turns into, so I think that's really important. That's why the moon is really, I look at the moon, the Lord of the Ascendant, the lunar and or the north and south nodes will normally tell me something to do with a lot of times in this horary thing, the beginning and the end of the matter, and how it's going to start, that kind of meme, how it started and how it's going type of thing, along with the symphony of other information. So there are also like really, really major detractors from being able to, if I have, a significator whose rulership is, or whose lord is Jupiter, and he's afflicted, I'm going to wait. And again, sometimes that can be a good thing. So I would encourage people that are interested in particularly like electional and horary, like, you gotta be okay with getting what you can get, and making the best out of that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel, oh, go on.
No, go ahead, Jim.
I feel like we kind of left the rest of Jin's question unanswered, which was what that had to do with maybe the lunar mansions, the nakshatras. Was that?
Yes. Thank you so much, Jamie. I appreciate
Yes,
that.
you see, pretty. Yeah, there's heavy use of those in the Picatrix. You've seen the lunar mansions. They're really big in the Perso-Arabic tradition. Now, a lot of, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the Jyotish and the Vedic astrology comes from a document called the Yavana Jataka. Have you heard of that? The
I
Yavana
have.
Jataka.
This is the strong part of my knowledge basis, rather than anything Hellenistic or even like the Hellenistic astrology at all. So that's sort of why I like. But yes, I agree with you.
What I was going to say was more Hellenistic astrology than you think, because the Yavana Jataka is basically the nativities of the Greeks is what the word means. So it's when they learned how to navigate the Red Sea, for trade, and they went to the Indian subcontinent, they brought a document called the Yavana Jataka, which was Hellenistic astrology at that time, and that sort of informed the existing lunar mansion based nakshatra proto astrology. And then all of a sudden, Vedic astrology has the angles, the ascendant and descendant, the MC and the IC, the Kentron. So there's, if you look, when they talk about the decans and the angles and stuff like that, these are essentially Indianized transliterations of Hellenistic astrological Greek terms. That it's very, like, what do they call the decans again? It's like decnas or dreknas or something like that. It's basically the decans, and the kentrons, which are the stakes, the angles, are called like kendra or something like that. So it's I'm just saying this to tell you, more Hellenistic astrology than you think if you know Jyotish or Vedic astrology, because it's really an importation of Hellenistic astrology. I mean, other than their nakshatras, their lunar mansions, which who knows how they shared those with the Persians, the Perso-Arabic tradition.
No, I appreciate that, Jamie. I know there's a lot of borrowing. There's a lot of syncretism. I mean, Tantra is all about syncretism. Now, I don't practice Jyotisha.
Mm.
I didn't mean to like misarticulate that. If that's like I implied that, only tantric astrology I understand, and I always say
What
that
is
because
that?
it's so it's found in it's basically in all the higher yoga texts. They all have their own sort of cosmological ordering, cosmological understanding, and cosmological magic. And
Like
so
Sri Lukteswar?
like you can look at the Sri Vidya texts or the Kala Chakra is a very famous one from the Berzin archive. They have a whole section on how it has its own section on cosmological magic. The Kala Chakra, or not Kala Chakra, sorry, Chakra Samvara, Guya Garba, Guya Samaja. All of these basically, like all tantric texts, basically have their own sort of cosmological and then ontological solutions for those cosmological problems.
Well, that's interesting. Email me some stuff, would you?
Sure, I'd love to.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One thing I did want to ask, it's kind of a very basic question, but I'm even just bringing it up for even some of the listeners that really don't know what goes along with like ritual magic as well. When you're talking about, I mean, I guess this would go along with astrological magic, probably also the same thing for me, from my experience with planetary or elemental. We were talking about the moon a lot before. For me, depending if it was waxing or waning would also determine when I'm doing it because of the invoking or banishing. Would you also apply that type of idea to the way you guys would normally do your work with this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I do invo and evocations in the waxing period. The only time I will use a dark moon for something like that, and I use the full too. I know a lot of like the Solomonic stuff says in the waxing, and you see it in the PGM too in the waxing. I use the full. I find it there's nothing wrong with the full, but in the dark, the only sort of interface that I'll work with in the dark is Hecate, because it's just a different aspect of her, the more chthonic. She's not entirely chthonic. I think people get the wrong idea about Hecate being an exclusively chthonic goddess. She oscillates, she encompasses all of them, but for the most part, I'll only do evocational or invocational ceremonial in the waxing period.
Ike, not to derail your like about Hecate, but I think that you might actually find this interesting. There's a grouping of Nitya goddesses. So these are the 16, or sometimes they're 15, sometimes they're 17, depending on whether it's what text it is. But they're a grouping of Dakini goddesses from central India, but they're also found in obviously Newari and Tibetan Buddhism. And they represent the phases of the lunar cycle. Specifically, like it's different forms. It's not just like one goddess, it's like all the number of the they're called the daughters, but they're related to obviously the grouping of matrikas, which are sometimes said to be the Pleiades, but sometimes they're also said to be the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper, again depending on the text.
Cool.
I like
Jamie,
I think in speaking of the Pleiades, there's I think in Chinese astrology they're called the 7 chicken sisters. Which I always thought was super cool. I wonder what that story is. 7 chicken
I only know
sisters.
the Buddhist story, Jamie, but I will definitely research it after you bring it up. Now that you've said it.
Yeah.
I do have
thought
one.
it was interesting.
Wait, can I just derail the conversation for a second?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I want to share this with our audience because it's a really important piece of information. I recently found out that in the Ebers Papyrus, which is an Egyptian medical papyrus, that a proctologist was the translation for the title they gave a proctologist was guardian of the anus. And I just think everyone should know that. I wanted everybody to have that and use it, use it in your magic. I don't know.
That's actually super interesting. And it's timely for me because I had a visit recently
Really?
with I'm getting to be of that age now. I don't want to get into detail, but I was a little worried at the visit because the proctologist had both of his hands on my shoulders, and
Oh,
I was like, what is that? Your wedding ring? And he's like, no, it's my watch. He said,
I love you. This is why I love you. I love doing anything with you.
it was his watch.
Oh.
This made me think of an actual question now about like how do you guys use astrology in the medical sense of, let's say, applying the connections between the house sign and planets, whatever, to the parts of the body, or to elect, like if I'm electing a surgery or whatever medical operation? Because I'm pretty sure they used it a lot before, but like nowadays in the West, it's completely disregarded, right? But curious to know if you guys ever worked with this kind of thing or researched.
Jamie, you want to take a stab
Oh,
at that,
sure.
or
Yeah, so melothesia, right? Melothesia is an ancient doctrine. It's actually pre-Hellenistic. This is a Mesopotamian doctrine that it's called the zodiacal man. And basically Aries is the top of the head, Taurus is Aries is the whole head. The neck sort of area is Taurus, and then Gemini are the arms, and Cancer is the sort of chest, and basically all the way down to the feet, which are Pisces, the two fish. So the zodiac just goes down the body, and then the planets are actually they're like organs in the body. So for the planets, I think Venus is the liver, or no, Venus is the kidneys and the basically genitalia. Mars is the gallbladder and intestines. I think Saturn is like the skin and bones and spleen. Jupiter is the liver and the blood because he's sanguine. I don't quite remember all of them, but you see where I'm going with that. So the planets are the organs, and the zodiac, the belt of the zodiac, is the length of the human body from Aries at the head to Pisces at the feet. And when you're looking at a figure or a chart, you would look at maybe the sixth house to see for health and wellness and illness and things. I would look first at the sixth house, maybe the condition of the Lord of the sixth house. If the sixth house were, on the zodiac sign of say Scorpio, it would be the privates area, and if you had say Mars in Scorpio, where he's the ruler of Scorpio, you could say that you have swelling or redness in the genitals or something like that, or heat, so and plus that moves around with profections too, which is my favorite Time Lord system. So where each year of life is a different house, and basically you just go around the wheel your whole life, but it's different each time, and that also moves your sixth house. You know what I mean? Because if you're treating your perfected house as your first house that year, that moves your sixth house into different regions of the body. And then when you have planets there, those are the organs, and how they're, somebody is asking about the Hermetic lots, part of spirit as an accurate representation for the, yes, I could see the part of spirit, just to answer Eros up real quick. As people have associated that with the personal daimon, but I look into Ibn Sina and Ibn Ezra and Mashallah. Ibn Ezra and Mashallah have the most rigorous technique of finding the personal daimon. It's really involved, though. You got to put each of the planets in the 5 hierarchical places. It's too technical for this, but it's really cool, and I think it's the most decisive method of finding the personal daimon. Sorry for that digression.
Yeah, I mean, my background in that kind of stuff actually is in Chinese medicine. So the way that I will apply it, actually have a very, I'd say, a rich or a full practice, applying sort of astrological herbalism, in the form of tinctures or topicals, things of this nature, teas, etc. Working much more in a homeopathic, with like cures like type of model. But yeah, I'm always looking at. I'm a little bit of a hypochondriac. I'm pretty sure I've sent Jamie like charts about questions on my health and stuff before, but I'm always looking at like 6th house transits and stuff like that, to see what's going on. And even, Lord of the Sixth, like what's going on there? How's that planet being aspected? What's going on there? What's applying there? What's separating there? But astrological herbalism has been, I would say, like the last maybe like year has been really, really big for me. We're putting together, my fiance and I are co-author in a book called The Astrological Gardener's Companion, and that's going to come out probably at the end. Maybe the beginning of 2027, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, that's usually more so how I will approach it. And then there's also certain preparations, like phylactery preparations, where like this is more of a PGM technique, but I will use the I would say a more I use the sun for healing. Okay, so I'm looking at what's going on solar wise. But I will consecrate what I'll do is I make an ink. I have a recipe for making ink out of myrrh and gum arabic and certain other natural colorations. I'll write out like a healing, either something from the Psalms or something, or from the Gospels, and I'll write that at the peak of that election in that time period, and I will roll it up, and I keep it in these little you can get them for like $8 on Amazon. They're like these little screw top sorts of I'll see if I can grab one and show it to you in a minute, but it's just this little screw top container, and they come in some of them come in really cool designs. Like mine's got a like that Greek kind of like tessellated, like that border design on it. And you just slip that in there when you're feeling ill, with this consecrated talismanic, you've prepared the ink, you've written it out, and sort of, I sing it out as I write it, over and over like a mantra. And then I'll hang it around my neck until I feel better.
Nice. Very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, I love the tincture making process. In fact, I've got a Venus tincture going right now. It's been in my broiler. The salts after I extracted the sulfur and the mercury, so the essential oils
spagyric.
and the alcohol. Spagyric, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have the
Exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I have the salts in the broiler right now. They've been under there, so every time I cook something, because it's so hard to get them white. It's so hard to get white salts without a torch. I don't have a torch. So
yeah, I've got the burner that gets up to 200,000 BTUs. It's like the only way to do it.
Yeah. I gotta get better gear.
What's your plant material that you're using? Damiana or?
I used rose petals for this Venus one.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I used universal vegetable mercury, i.e. grain alcohol, because how much alcohol are you going to get out of, probably 40 rose petals? Not a ton. But so you have to use, it's still same kingdom, same mercury, So I think it's perfectly. In fact, a lot of alchemists would have used brandy long ago.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is just But yeah, that's all. I mean, Paracelsus using astrology for his spagyric tincture
Tycho
making, I
Brahe.
think yeah, and then using that in the medical astrology, iatro mathematics, in the medical context, I think is really great. I mean, of course, as a professional astrologer, though, you got to be careful because you tell people, "Oh, just don't worry about it. Go take this tincture," and then all of a sudden, somebody's heart falls out their ass, and then you're on the hook or somehow, Their mom's like, you made my son's heart fall out his ass.
That is not guardian of the anus stuff. Okay. That's not being a guardian of the anus. If hearts are falling out of it, then we're in trouble.
Right.
Just real quick, I just want a shameless plug here. You guys might actually be interested in it, but next Friday I do have something I thought was really interesting. I cover magical herbs, the stuff that we would normally think that we use in witchcraft or ceremonial magic, and I have the effects of them on our cranial nerves.
Wow.
Some actual real interesting stuff with that, to tell you the truth.
Some of them like nervines.
Some of them, it's like what it's kind of known to do magically is almost like, all right, it's actually kind of recreating that in your body and inhaling it. That's hard to explain, but some of them you kind of see like, oh wow, all right, it's interesting for sure.
It doesn't sound that hard to explain. I've inhaled marijuana before.
Yeah. Exactly.
So Eros and I have a show on Mondays where we're talking about spagyrics and making them and whatnot. But it's pretty interesting. She was talking about a Venus love spell, I guess. Jupiter over her heart and lion on her finger, related to Leo in the 9th house of Venus or something.
I was just going to say. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, let me just ask this question too, real quick. And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get probably not the best idea. But from my experience, and I didn't do too much astrological magic, but when I did, I kind of used the hexagram ritual. I'm assuming you guys probably don't even. I mean, would that be something you'd still use now for that type of work, or is there bigger things that you've moved on to, like other rituals that would be better for that?
I like the hexagram, but I don't think it's. You gotta. First of all, you got to use the hexagram, at the very least, work with every planet 3 or 4 times with the hexagram. And then you got to see its effects because it has a very a general kind of thing. Unless you have a really, really specific thing that you're doing, it's kind of like this for me anyway, it's this 360 effect where I didn't necessarily intend for this to happen, but it's related and et cetera, so on and so forth. I would say it's situationally appropriate. I'm not for something that I'm pulling from the PGM, even though I have kind of blended both of them before. I just don't find that it's necessary to use the hexagram for stuff like that. I think it can also interfere. I like it when I'm making traditional talismans out of a specific material with the squares and the sigils and stuff straight out of Agrippa and all that kind of stuff. That's when I'll use the hexagram. I find that combination is really well. That's how I learned how to consecrate talismans, was through the hexagram.
Yep. Same thing. I thought it was kind of I could think getting it in depth as you guys are. I don't even know if I'd suggest the hexagram. I just feel like that would, I don't know. It would be the best. I don't know. That's all.
What do you? It's what are you trying to make me do? Quit? It's so involved.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm sorry. Now I interrupted somebody for that. So go ahead. Was that Branch?
No, I just wanted to say that astroherbalism, at least you guys are speaking I can understand that language at least. I think that's really interesting. I feel like there's a lot of first principle experimentation that people can do with herbs to understand planetary natures, because obviously there's a direct one-to-one relationship as long as you know the planetary metal content of whatever herb you want to reduce or make into incense. Incense is a good one for normies rather than go full on sporadic, I think. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that or commentary.
Are you using culpepper or like Cunningham's herbal?
I'm very familiar with both. I'm also familiar with a lot of the Chinese sort of like Taoist cosmological texts on like the planetary natures as it relates to TCM herbs. I also speak
I see.
Mandarin, so that obviously helps me a little bit in that endeavor. And then I'm familiar with like the Garuda Purana, which lists it in an Ayurvedic context, with the Grahas and also the Atharvadas in themselves lay out a kind of like astro-medicalism. It's very rudimentary. I'm sure, Jamie, you'd probably find it like you'd be like, oh, this is just derived from like the, Mughalized Arabic text, but it's something.
Yeah. I mean, Ike wrote a book, Etheric Magic, on Llewellyn, and I think there are a lot of those principles, like in terms of the energy work and stuff like that. Is any of that pertinent to what we're talking about here? I mean,
yeah. There's like a
because I don't,
book
I gotta.
Well, go ahead.
go.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say only because I don't know anything about any of that.
I would say that like, so there's tons of work on what they call like plant energetics and planetary herbology. I do have a little bit of an issue with, right? I had to call it etheric energy, or I had to talk about energy work. This is the only thing I have recourse to in order to be able to explain this stuff and to be able to make it a little bit more tangible. I'm not certain that it is. And I say this in the book. I say it when I give presentations. I'm using energy almost as like it's just a place marker. I would say we don't really know entirely what it is, but we do know. I really like the term that you used, effluence. I really like that. But I would say that the way that I think a Western kind of ceremonialist, let's say somebody that came through the Golden Dawn or derivative traditions, the way that they're really going to be able to understand a lot of that stuff is in the Kabbalistic tree of life. Like, I had to rely on that as well because it maps onto the body as a microcosm. And so you can, I also find, like, I started off in Zazen meditation and certain Vedic practices that are kind of similar to Kundalini, and just working with the midline. It's good, I think, in terms of purifying and sort of condensing this energy and et cetera, and so on and so forth. But once you break it out into those three pillars of the tree of life, or really once you get to like further levels, you're working with 5 pillars, right? In the microcosm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's at a certain point in Golden Dawn work, you're working with 5 pillars in the sphere of sensation. It broadens it up for magic because every one of those things is corresponded to a planet, a zodiacal constellation, an element, every part of that tree. So it really broadens it up for me in terms of a magical schema. And you could totally work that kind of planetary, I guess, energetic system, but you're going to need to like memorize a bunch of correspondences. I don't know how many people want to do that, but I know if you come through that sort of trajectory and that training, like you probably already have it.
Yeah, one thing I may say, and then I'll have to jump out. It's pretty amazing to see when, for example, I did work with other people on some energetic, like path working or like going up their tree and whatever, like as I was studying and helping them go and feel for themselves. And when they describe what they're seeing or feeling and so on, and it matches completely like the correspondences. So even if they don't know that it matches, just because, they're feeling and they're trying to explain with their own words, somebody that does understand can do the the matching, and it's so nice and reaffirms the how that works, right? So it's pretty fucking cool. Guys, thanks a lot for the chat. Thanks a lot everyone that watched until here, and see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, bud. Chin or Branch or Hellas, did you want to ask anything? Say anything?
I do have a question, but Jin's welcome to go ahead of me if he likes.
Thank you, Joshua. You're being so nice to me and deferential. We're all equals in the Great Lodge, just for the record. I'm not the boss, but you know, he's maybe he's doing a bit. I don't know. Jamie, I have a quick question for you. You sort of discussed this last time, and it's directly related to your Astrogoetic book. So when you started doing, like, because you mentioned that you use the tarot for like part of that workings, or you explained like how you would use certain tarot cards to represent obviously certain astrological conditions or Kabbalistic sort of associations. What, for getting into tarot, like I understand the tree in my own way, in my own tantric way, and I am a big, Ike knows this, I'm a big fan of DCS, David Heimsmith, excuse me, sorry. And so I've read all his books, and I've also read like Ramek and stuff, but I don't come at it from like a necessarily hermetic perspective. So when I'm now trying to learn a little tarot, at least in its application to the tree. So what would you recommend for me, or maybe someone who's less familiar with the tree, to get into tarot like, do you like Tomberg, or is there something like, is it whatever you like? I'm curious. I would like to learn whatever you do, because obviously I respect it highly.
For me, I can't think of a book like a tarot book that is like a one great book. And I've told people this over the years, and I stand by this, is like, there is nobody could just sit there and write it out in a book and I think it's how you approach that symbol set. It's the other things in your life. Are you familiar with how the divine liturgy works? Are you familiar with a Catholic mass? Are you familiar with rudimentary Kabbalah? Are you good with mythology? Do you know Renaissance history? Do you know courtly heraldic symbolism? Do you know a little bit of alchemy? It's when you start to know when you start to develop those modes of interpretation, when you start to develop a hermeneutic toolkit, is when I think when you could really access. Do you know Pythagorean numerology, for example? When you think of one, is it the monad? Is it the Tohen? Or and is the dyad evil to you? Is it this indefinite dyad? So there's all these I think tangential things that inform. I guess the more you know, the more you can sort of get out of the tarot. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but reading a book on tarot, like Tomberg, I've read Tomberg, and I'm uncomfortable with continental correspondences like he uses, like Levy. I'm just better with Golden Dawn correspondences. I think they're neater. I think they're tighter. And yes, there's a couple of transpositions there, but it's nothing I'm worried about. And it's the language that we speak. So there's the other thing. When we talk about, and I know you're a Kabbalist, when we talk about the Gra tree or this tree or that tree, I think we all agree pretty much on the Kircher tree. And I think we all pretty much agree on the Queen color scale, just if we're talking generally about this stuff. So, and we all pretty much agree on the attribution of the tarot to the Netivot, or the paths. So I think it's just courtesy amongst occultists to talk in the language that everybody knows, and to use gematria values that everybody kind of agrees with, as opposed to some ordinal thing or some other creative interpretation. But yeah, it's just something. Yeah, you could specialize on your own, but when you and I are talking, I'm going to use the language that we know.
Absolutely.
Have in common. I don't know if that kind of veered too much from your question, but yes, about tarot, I think it's more the things that are around the things that you learn around tarot that inform it. Ike?
So sorry about that, Jamie. Apologize.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like music. You're developing this je ne sais quoi, this kind of taste almost, but it's sort of this foundational backdrop to being able to interpret this stuff, because the tarot, I have seen the tarot work just as well for hardcore, like militant Golden Dawn correspondence people as I do for people who treat the tarot like it's an oracle deck or something like that. I've seen it work fine in both situations. I think consistency in your own method is important. But I also think, this is going to sound cheesy and new agey, but I mean, tarot was the first, it still is my preferred divination method, but you got to develop a relationship with the cards. They speak to you like a person, a lot of times they speak to you like a counselor. It's not you. I feel like one of the things about the Golden Dawn system is that I think it's better for tarot card path workings or things like you're using, where you're doing this sort of, using the tarot as like associations for particular planetary, whatever it is. But I think ultimately to develop a really serious tarot practice, you got to just develop a relationship and be consistent with your methodology. And I agree with you. Tarot it's always been like my number one thing. It was the first like occult tool that I ever purchased and worked with, but I can count on one hand how many tarot books I've read. It kind of because like the first third through everything I've tried to read, I've been like, this gets more in the way than helping me.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way. And, there's another interesting thing about developing that theoretical sort of lens on the tarot is like, as opposed to, and it's my first divination technique as well. And I came at it completely intuitively, in fact, almost in the psychological sort of sense, because I, like all of us, growing up in the modern West, we're disenchanted beings. We're just hardwired for atheistic materialism and nihilism. I mean, it's just it's in our commercials, it's in our cars, it's in our food. It's just what we take. Everything's weights and measures. The planets are meaningless, just dead matter held together by some natural force or other. But I don't want to go down that path right now. But I will say that regarding the tarot, starting from that intuitive place and then learning all this theory and all the GD correspondences and all the mythology and all these different ways of looking at it, then coming back hopefully to where the intuitive and the intellectual kind of meet, and you don't have to think about those correspondences anymore. It's become something where these symbols, especially I use Tarot de Marseille and Marseille. These are nice, like woodcutty looking, strong, austere images. I started on Rider-Waite like most people, but I switched to these pretty early on, and I just find them to be more penetrative. Like when I look at a Tarot de Marseille card, it's just like it can bypass my intellect, or it can, before I get in there and start interpreting it, just like dream interpretation. And Danny Newman told me this. He got it from Freud or Jung or somebody, but he said the first thing in dream interpretation that you should think is, how does it feel? Not what does it mean? When you have this crazy dream, you wake up in the morning, what does it mean? My dog has ESP with me and we were eating cereal or whatever, but don't look at like what it means. Try and feel those feelings, around that. So I think the really integrative part of tarot is when the theory and the practice and the intuition and the intellection, I guess, kind of become one thing, and you really just absorb the symbols for what they are, and maybe you're able to articulate those to somebody else.
Thank you both. Appreciate that greatly.
Sure.
Do you think at some point, this type of magic was more open in the public, or more well accepted? Like I think, like during the Renaissance, do you think maybe it was used more or considered more?
The Roman Empire
Yeah.
was
Everyone was an astrologer back then.
yeah, the Thrasyllus. I mean, it was part of the legislature.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was like a civic art.
Yeah, absolutely. It all has to do, I think, exactly with what you were saying, Jamie, is that atheistic materialism, and it's unconscious because it just surrounds us completely. That just it relegates it to this, the bin of woo. It's like, so it's it's been that way probably since the Ptolemaic model, literally Ptolemy's sort of model of the spheres was kind of like disproven. But I think the broader project of what we call the Enlightenment really was this prolonged effort to sort of disenchant everything. But it didn't successfully do that. I think, somebody asked me a question recently, or they posted up on my wall, and I haven't gotten to it yet to answer. They said, okay, if this stuff was so powerful, why did modern science, why was the Enlightenment able to overcome it and destroy it? The first thing is it didn't destroy it. Okay. We're all sitting here. We all do this shit. It did not destroy it. First of all. Second of all, it really was a shift in predominantly the Protestant, and Walter Hanegraaff has done great research on this. The Protestant universities wanted to strip out this sort of Platonizing version of Christianity. And little did they know that project, once begun, would eventually just come back to bite them in the ass and eat them alive in terms of, the academic institutions. But it's, I think that's what rendered it controversial. But even still, there were people in the 15th and 16th century still using this stuff. There were still some doctors that it's even still well known. Like you don't draw blood. You don't do surgery in the full of the moon. That's still like a modern thing, because why? Because it's like you're gonna have a harder time controlling blood loss. So even back then, it was, I think, something that was quietly done.
Yeah, I know. Like just even recently, as maybe just coincidental, people I've covered on the show, like I think Tycho Brahe and Kepler and Appianus, like they all, I think, at some point got paid by kings or powerful people just to do to do charts. It was like almost they peddle that shit like as a way of like making money in between, I guess, doing things.
The Habsburgs
almost.
Yeah, Rudolph and the Habsburgs, I think they both worked for them.
Tycho Brahe had 2 castles that he built specifically for the observations, and the entire things were engineered for that purpose. So this was major operations going on back then with just normal. I mean, I don't think he fully even had the telescope either. So this was just standard observation of the sky.
Yeah, him and his drunken elk.
Yeah,
fell down the stairs.
Yeah. It was another interesting thing about him too. They do speculate that they think his flower gardens are even planted in like planetary, like everything that would go along, I guess, with Mars would be in the same area, or Jupiter would be all in the same area. Like he planted all those things like separately to go along with each other.
Tycho did.
That's what I came across when I was covering him. Yeah. He was really big into the Chinks shit. He provided health for everybody on that fucking island.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah, I like his cosmology. I mean, I think he really did an improvement on the Ptolemaic thing by making Venus and Mercury go around the sun, because they have, that's a better explanation of than the epicircles and deferents and things like that Ptolemy had to explain those inferior planets and their retrogradations and stuff like that. But yeah, I love the Tychonic cosmology, and Ike and I have talked about this a ton, and it's a charge that many anti-astrologers level at astrology, is that it's geocentric. They say it's geocentric, so it's an outmoded cosmology. But that's astrology. We use the word georeferential. It's georeferential because the Earth is the reference point from which human beings survey the cosmos. The Earth
Right.
is the locus of human consciousness. Astrology is an earthly art that we apply to the cosmos. So we live on the Earth. It's our perspective, and it makes sense to think of the Earth as being the stationary central object. So one little thought, exercise for this would be, imagine you're looking at our solar system from celestial north. You're out in space and you're looking down at our sun, and all the planets are orbiting it, right? Take the pin out of the sun, stick it in the Earth, and leave all the movements exactly the same, and you're totally fine. You know what I mean? That's all you need. You don't need to believe something ridiculous to be an astrologer. You don't need to believe in geocentrism. You need to believe that the Earth is your locus of observation, and you need to consider that both the Earth and the sun are careening through space at some ungodly miles per hour, right? Doesn't matter which one's rotating around which, just stick the pin in the Earth, leave everything exactly the same, and you're fine. You have Tycho's cosmology right there.
Yeah.
Bingo.
And it's virtually useless, in my opinion. It's virtually useless to adopt any other perspective when you are doing any kind of magic,
Right.
because magic is all about the phenomenology. And so it's like, as a magician, you need to be in the driver's seat. When you're outsourcing sort of the, whatever it is, the locus of gravity or whatever you think it is, I think the main thing is this idea that when we reallocate the quote unquote center to the sun, it kind of, it detracts from the specialness of human beings. It's like, I think, again, that's another modern or postmodern misconception. I think it's a corruption of our thinking that is a product of this everywhere we look atheistic reductionist materialism. It doesn't matter if the center of the center of gravity is the sun. Your experience is in your fucking body, in the room you're in the town you're in the state you're in, the fucking planet you're on. So that does not negate any of that stuff. And again, like Jamie's saying, you don't need to say either or. You got to have two things that have their own domain of authority, right? Let's say the phenomenological and the scientific or empirical, or the subjective and the objective, respectively. They got to have their own domains of authority if you're going to do this shit. And they have to be in communication with each other, but one shouldn't be trying to stamp the other one out. But particularly when you're working magic, it is useless to not adopt that geocentric driver's or georeferential driver's seat view of the cosmos, because both are true. They're just different kinds of truths.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I also agree that if you're doing Hellenistic, medieval, Renaissance, Elizabethan, whatever, if you're doing any traditional astrology or magic, you at least have to know that cosmological model. You have to know the Aristotelian, Ptolemaic kind of situation of the cosmos. You have to know that the elements are in their natural place in the sublunary sphere, meaning it's pre-gravitational, right? They didn't know about gravity. So they had the Earth in the center. They had water on top of the Earth. They had air on top of water. They had fire lighter than air. You could see when you drop a pebble into water that the Earth sinks. You could see that when you put air in the water, the bubbles rise. You could see that fire is lighter than air. I mean, that's just the way the elements stratify, or the states of matter, because earth is just solid, water is liquid, or air is gaseous, fire is plasmic. That's all. So, and then you get the etheric spheres, like Ike was talking about, incorruptible, unchangeable, above the sphere, the sublunary sphere of generation and corruption. And then beyond that, the Ogdoad, the Ennead, etc., these angelic spheres, these noetic sphere, whatever model you're working with metaphysically, because you're beyond the physics at that point.
Yeah, and one thing that I made a note that I wanted, like right before we started talking, that I wanted to kind of offer to anybody that's trying to understand astrological stuff, because I really feel for the person. I did magic for years, and I couldn't wrap my head around astrology. I feel for people who can't understand it, because I'm trying to scientify it, or I was. But this helped me. I don't know how much it'll help everyone, but I'm sure there are some people out there that will be interested in understanding this. The basic premise of astrology, like Jamie's saying, is not necessarily that there are these astral rays, again, a substance of sorts. It's more so that everything is interconnected on the level of the blueprint, the level of the metaphysic. And for those of you that need a little bit more of a philosophical or sophisticated way of thinking about it, we talk about it in Agrippa, you talk about it in Iamblichus. Any kind of drawing down effluence has to do with this chain of flow, okay, from the divine through the celestial to the material. Now, that implies like proximity, which again, there's a truth to that, but there's also this other truth. And the other truth, which was really elaborated by the Stoics, but I think Plotinus, the quote unquote father of Neoplatonism, really nailed it. This idea of sympatheia, sympathy. Okay. What he said, and if you're familiar with the tree of life, you'll understand this, the Kabbalistic tree of life. What he said is that like sympatheia doesn't, the fact that everything is, I guess the word he used was emanations, right? Proodos, a moving outward, an emanation. But he said, Plotinus specifies, because of sympatheia, that emanation of the spheres doesn't necessarily happen sequentially. It's just a hierarchical relationship. It's a series of relationships that is happening at the same time. It's the same thing with the lightning flash on the tree of life. Keter and Malkuth are happening at the same time. They just have a hierarchical relationship and this stratification of relationships between them. So I don't know how much that helped. It certainly helped me to kind of not get caught up in like, okay, I've got this on the one hand reductive, quote unquote, empirical model of the way that the cosmos works. And then on the other hand, I've got this, like, I don't know, German fairy tale. I don't want to have either of those. What was much more satisfying to me and lined up with my phenomenology of the experience of practicing astrological magic is to view everything as having this sympatheia, right? Where there is relationship to each other, but it's not necessarily that, everything is sequential or linear, let's say, right? Because then that's how metaphysical causality happens, is that it's not linear.
Right, exactly. Felix Fortuna Rex is asking, King of Happy Fortune is asking, modern astrology compared to ancient astrology, modern using the outer planets or just the original 5 plus the 2 luminaries. I think that's worth talking about for a second. Just on the basic astrological level, traditional astrology just uses the the visible planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus was discovered, I want to say 1781 by Herschel. And then later I think it was like 1930 or something when they discovered Pluto. But those being invisible planets, the ancients knew nothing of them until telescopes, of course. But if you do use them, I never use them, but I don't do a lot of mundane astrology. If I did mundane or worldly astrology, talking about current events and things like that, I would absolutely look at the outer planets, the trans-Saturnian planets, because they're generational. They have to do more with groups of people and civilizations and stuff, because it takes, I want to say 284 years or something like that for Pluto to make a complete orbital cycle. So if you're doing natal astrology or electional astrology or stuff like that, I wouldn't even bother with them. They're doing, unless maybe you have a very partile conjunction, like your Pluto is right on the very degree of your Mars, you might consider it a little bit, and that's just that's just Mars a little a little like swole or whatever.
Jamie, I got to know, what about the asteroids? So we've had people on talking about the significance of the asteroids in their own personal readings, and how accurate the asteroids are when combining them with the other two forms, which then creates sort of like a 3 locking mechanism, right? So like 3 turns would be, you've got the zodiac on the outside, the planets on the inside, and then a further significator would be the asteroids, which would bring more meaning to the situation. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think, that could fine tune some things. I personally don't work with them. I do some fixed star work. I like to consider the fixed stars, but asteroids, I just haven't gotten into them. It's not enough time in the day, I guess. I don't know. Or not enough interest.
It's funny,
right
all of them
currently.
All of them are named by the Vatican, right? The Vatican are the ones choosing these names for these asteroids, and it all comes from really significant Greek myths. So they're not naming this stuff after any of these saints or any of these popes or anything. It's really strange if you think about it. But
yeah,
their accurate equivocations of these different planets and their significance in these charts is amazing, because you can just plug this stuff right in and start to figure out what did she call it? It was some form of like crime astrology. Like that's what her main focus was. I forgot her name, but she was using the asteroids. She was getting really, really tight predictions on crime astrology, forensic astrology. That's what she called it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that.
When you had mentioned something before about like, I guess you had mentioned earlier about like ways of bringing things down into form. I know what you were saying, talking about earlier is predates the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh formula probably, but would you look at that as like another way of doing that?
In the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh formula, in terms of
like actually using that to bring something down into like your working area.
Personally, so this is something that you're probably referring to, the 4 worlds method of drawing down through the letters of the Tetragrammaton. I got to be honest with you. I think that there's 2 main things that I've learned about astrological practice. It has to take place at a good time, at an appropriate time. Kind of like what Matt was saying earlier. But then the other piece is, and the Picatrix talks about this right out of the gate, right? This 11th century astrological magical book on talismancy, etc., opens up with the first practical pieces in like chapter 4 or something, with the mansions of the moon. But it mentions multiple times, you could do this stuff if you don't believe it. If there's any doubt, it won't work. It won't, like the Picatrix says that, not me. But I have found that to be very true. So those are my requirements really for drawing things down. The other, you know, I wouldn't use like a Yod He Vav He formula. I'm getting disenchanted with I don't even know if I should say this, but I'm getting disenchanted with Kabbalistic magic. I'm really reverting much more to, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. Seriously, it's a very good system. But I'm much more interested in the Hellenic and Hellenistic. I think it's because my Greek is a lot better than my Hebrew. Right. I mean, my father's from Greece. I can speak the language decently. So I'm much more interested in what's going on there, having sort of an ethnic connection to it, I guess, a blood connection. But the other thing that I think is important for once you've drawn the thing down, how to test if it's actually happened. I think that's a really important thing as well, developing those methods or having a teacher show you some of those methods to be able to test your work. But those are the three main components for me. It's got to happen at the right time. You know, you got to have the right materials too. Although Warnock, he gives some really, really great examples of paper talismans. And I mean, the Taoist magical tradition of talismancy and sigil craft also utilized paper. But for the most part, I like to have the right materials. The timing is indispensable. Belief, assurance, confidence needs to be, true belief needs to be there. And then being able to test my methods. So I don't know, that I guess that doesn't really answer your question, but I don't really use that method. The only method I've used Kabbalistically has been, you know, the hexagram and Ararita formula to bring things down. But you know, you're going through the entire hierarchy. You know, when you're doing the hexagram, you open up you do the lesser hexagram and kind of create the area. Then you have the targeted greater hexagram, which is facing the constellation or the planet, wherever the quarter of the heavens where this planetary, you know, effluence is, its body is located. And then you call in the hierarchy. So you start at the highest divine name and work your way down. That's associated with the planetary sphere all the way down to the spirit. And then it just depends, like, what are you trying to do? You know, are you doing the talisman? Do you just want to bathe in the ambiance of the planet? That's a thing too. People do that. Yeah.
Well, that now it just, I'm probably gonna make myself sound stupid, but if you talk about the hexagram, that would be more of like the LVX actually, then, right? Or is that the same?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that it
utilizes,
utilizes,
like kind of gives you the idea that if you're invoking, you are pulling something down.
Yeah, we call it the shefa in Kabbalistic magic. When you're doing, you know, the vibration of the names, and then you drop your arms at the side, the shefa is supposed to enter. The one reason I don't recommend the LVX to people is because it's the adept formula of the Golden Dawn. It's not the adept formula of the Crowleyan stuff, because he changes, he takes out or moves the position of the crucified and resurrected God. That's not the primary thing. In the Golden Dawn, Osiris is the primary thing, the resurrecting God. And the reason why I say that is because LVX is a magical formula. So if you are invoking that formula consistently, what you're not understanding is that it's a formula of death.
Oh.
And that's, I don't know how much anybody knows about the 5 = 6 of the Golden Dawn. I won't put any spoilers. Has very much to do with this idea of death and rebirth, and that, you know, that initiatory current that you're invoking will you're asking, you know, put me to death, put, you know, lowercase m me to death.
I used that shit for about 4 years straight.
Exactly. So and I did too. But you know, and it can create a lot of, in my experience and in the experience of other Golden Dawn practitioners that I've worked with, it can create a lot of unwanted or you know, just intense stuff. So again, it's another reason why, like, I don't often recommend, even in the private classes I give, I don't often recommend that people pull rituals out of like the Golden Dawn whole cloth, and if you're not working that system.
It's a good. It's good advice.
Maybe, who knows? I mean, I'm sure there's some people that are like, "Fuck this guy! I did the LVX. I got a car." You know? but
You didn't know that one. Fuck. What the fuck was I doing wrong?
yeah.
Was there any other questions in the chat that maybe?
I just wanted to say I appreciated what Ike said, everything he said about Kabbalistic magic and correspondences and like utilizing the system of. I mean, it's hard for me, Ike, because I don't have my cultural familiarity with certain things is, you know, I don't have like I'm mixed. So it's like for me, it's like I just draw from like what I know, but it's not necessarily because I have like a deep rooted like blood memory of it. But I try and do that. But I appreciate what you said, everything that you said. I think it was important to hear. And even the thing about the 5 and the 6 is very interesting because there's a Vajrasattva Tantra that talks about, he says like in the Tantra, the 5 or the 6 arises in the 5, but then the 6 also has to descend back into the 5 to like do something with it. So I don't know. It kind of reminds me of that dialectical relationship.
Well, go ahead. I was waiting for you
I wasn't
guys.
gonna say anything. I was just leaning forward.
So I was going to ask about origin. So I think a lot of this goes into actual celebration of the birthday itself as being an astrologically significant event, because I see that Origen, one of the early church fathers, said that no saints or righteous individuals in the scripture celebrated their birthdays, asserting that such festivities were associated with sinners and pagan practices rather than faithful followers of God. So the idea of having a birthday itself doesn't seem to be rooted in sort of the Abrahamic traditions at all. It's like a carryover. Even after they tried to get rid of most of these pagan practices, people didn't want to get rid of their own birthdays and these celebrations having to do with, you know, the ancient gods. We've sort of left all of those conceptions of the birthday out and just sort of stuck with the date. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking, well, it's because, you know, and some people will just attribute this to the Gnostics, but growing up Catholic and in the Orthodox Church, like Greek Orthodox Church, I can tell you, like, all forms of older Christianity are they're not world affirming. Okay, the incarnation, the only incarnation that really mattered was the birth of Christ, and it's not necessarily as like world denying as some of the Gnostic sects, particularly the Sethians, right? The Valentinians were not that world denying. They didn't really think the demiurge was evil. It's just that people we have this bracket term called Gnosticism that we just throw all this bullshit into, and so you don't really get a really good picture of what those early Christianities were talking about. But even on the right, so it's a good example. Plotinus, father of Neoplatonism, he wrote a tract, you know, against the Gnostics. The thing is, he's only arguing with them theologically. How could you think the demiurge is evil? How could you think that? But he's not arguing with them the fact that, like, oh yeah, but don't indulge anything. I mean, Porphyry starts the life of Pythagoras. The beginning of his biography goes, or the life of Plotinus says, Plotinus seemed to be ashamed to be in a body. I mean, so even in the pagan practices that were trying to have this anagogic ascent through various means, they didn't look very well on at worldliness. Now that's where you get Iamblichus, who says, hey guys, it's not all about transcendence. There's immanence too. And yeah, there has to be immanence. Otherwise there's no order and magic doesn't work and nothing works at that point. So in that sense, it's a very, especially for a theurgic magician, it's a very nuanced sort of line that you have to that you have to walk. What do you think about that, Jamie? I'm interested.
I like Gregory Palamas's sort of solution to that. Well, it wasn't totally his, but he did the best sort of articulation of it, I think, is ousia and energeia, that the essence of God is apophatic. It's ineffable, etc. We can't know anything about it. We can't define it in any meaningful sense. It's just completely escapes our mentation entirely. But we could know its or his energies in the world, its activities in the world. So I think I forget where this started in this conversation, but that's where when you were talking, that's kind of what I was thinking about near the end. There is that's one way. About going back. So theosis, at least in some Orthodox circles, theosis is made possible by energeia, by activities in the world. So it sounds very close to the synthemata that are sewn into reality, and in fact, a lot of that, as it passes through Pseudo-Dionysius and others, and Plotinus, who was, not to mention Origen and Clement of Alexandria, how a lot of this makes it into the early church fathers, and a lot of this, late Platonic theurgical stuff. These ideas, and if you look at icons, for example, they're not just, icon carvers. They're not just making a painting. These are windows to the noetic realm. These are like real portals, sort of, metaphysically. So there's a intact, I think late Platonism is sort of alive and well. And it's as hidden as Palomayombe or whatever is in Santeria or Catholicism. You know how these Yoruban magical initiatic traditions were hidden under the veneer, a thin veneer of Catholic saints and stuff like that, just so they can, I think there's a similar sort of mechanism, an earlier and similar mechanism with some late Platonic ideas and Christianity, how there's sort of orthodoxy as a Trojan horse for some of that stuff, let's say. And I don't know if that has anything to do with what we were talking about, but I feel like energies and essences was a place we were going. Is that right?
Yeah, that could be like a really good title for a new age music album. Energies and essences.
Yeah.
It's somebody playing a Tibetan bowl for 4 hours. Like that.
Exactly.
Did anybody have? So it's already 2 hours. I mean, I hate to wrap it up, but I guess we have to stop at some point. Did anybody have any questions or anything before?
Well, I did have a question.
Go for it, Branch. Get it off.
Okay, one moment here. I have it written down. So I guess just whatever you want to respond to out of this, but I had several kind of points here I wanted to ask about, and I'm glad I waited because I did hear you mention the porphyry tree, and my understanding is that may have been, how we ended up with like the Tree of Life Sephiroth kind of model today with the paths. It seems like it does begin as that, and then I was going to mention Kircher, who then added the letters to the paths, and then you guys ended up saying it, so that's why I like to wait a lot of times, so it makes more sense when I actually talk about it, I guess. But anyway, my question was kind of like referencing these letters on the paths, and so when we're dealing with the path between Malkuth and Yesod, are we kind of dealing with like the firmament there, and these letters that are on those paths there, I was looking at them, and it seems to me that's like Lamed, Mem, Nun, and Dalet. And you guys were talking about windows and doors just a moment ago, even speculatively. But it makes me think of the door in heaven, or the portals in heaven, through which God would send the waters to flood the earth, or he sends his seed, Christ, or his prophets, or where, our birthdays are kind of celebrated as when we passed through the door of heaven, right? And his shepherds, like his prophets, right? So um, I just was curious if maybe that's what the lunar mansions are all about, is maybe it's the door to the mansion, so to speak. And maybe that's why these times are important, because doing something at the wrong time would be like trying to get through the wall of the mansion rather than the door, so to speak, right? And it makes me think of references Christ even made to about how like the way is narrow, so maybe there are importances to take note of here. And then let me see here. I think Ike mentioned earlier how only the sublunar can be changed, and so I guess I kind of had a question about whether or not the pip cards, is that what, do they only rest in the domain of Malkuth, where change can occur, representing the four elements, yet they don't seem to be important above that, so and do they represent the four seasons that occur on Malkuth, perhaps? So anyway, sorry, I tried to do a good job of threading together my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if Jamie wants to tackle the first part of that, but I have ideas about the pips.
Well, and how the porphyry tree maybe is that a good diagram of the chain that you guys have talked about.
Porphyry. The thing, I think the thing that people get wrong about Porphyry's tree is that it wasn't really porphyry. It was, so Porphyry wrote this introduction because one of his students or one of his friends was having a really hard time. Actually, it was a Roman politician was having a really hard time understanding Aristotle's categories. Aristotle wrote it that way. So, there's that fabled transaction or that letter between Alexander and Aristotle where he goes, Alexander's expressing disapproval about Aristotle publishing his teachings. And Aristotle goes, yes, I have published it, but I also haven't. So it was supposed to be very, very rigorous, esoteric. So Porphyry writes this thing called the Isagoge, the introduction. Very, very, I just finished reading it for the second time 2 days ago. And he's showing how Aristotle, uses what is essentially a Platonic technique that is developed in the Sophist, Platonic dialogue, the Sophist, showing how Aristotle breaks everything down into genus, species, difference, particularity, and accident. And so that's why we get the Porphyry's tree. It's really Porphyry's kind of pedagogical model of teaching Aristotle. So, ultimately the idea is Platonic.
Thank
you. Yeah.
I don't know
the other
part.
Yeah, I don't know what you, maybe you want to repeat the part about the firmament. I didn't.
Well, I just found how on that particular model, how it's evolved from that tree, and become what it is now. We kind of have the sun and the moon and the stars kind of there, resonating with the lower paths, and then there's also these letters. And I was wondering if maybe just any insights that maybe came from that, maybe doors and portals into heaven, etc. And if the pip cards kind of represented the seasons, the four seasons on Malkuth, because they don't seem to occur up above it. You said sublunar was where all the change occurred, so I was wondering if maybe the pip cards kind of made sense down there on Malkuth only.
Well, there's definitely the arrangement, the standard Golden Dawn arrangement, but there's also, I tend to look at tarot sort of cosmically, where you get Aleph, Mem, and Sheen. The Fool, the Hanged Man, and Judgment, right? Where they're elemental, right? So they would be sort of at the bottom. And then with maybe the operator representing the earth element, because obviously Aleph, Mem, and Sheen, that's air, fire, air, water, and fire. So you wouldn't have an Earth there. So maybe the operator is Earth, I think some people sometimes say. But then there's the 7 double-lettered cards are the planets, the planetary spheres above that, from the moon up to Saturn. And then you're at Bina there, Kabbalah, in terms of sephirotically, let's say. And then the firmament would be the 8th sphere, which would be Hokmah, right? So Hokmah, I think most people understand to be the firmament. And then beyond that, you'd have Kether, the crown, which is sort of Enneatic or Noetic. I mean, that's how I kind of look at. Oh, and then the pip cards, I see them as decans. So you've got like 2, 3, 4. Well, there's a way to lay them out. And there's 36 of them if you take the aces out. So there's a way to make those. You can make a really nice circle with all of this. It's actually a neat little exercise where you use all the cards and you make this cosmic model that emanates from the Earth in the center out to the beyond the Ennead, or up to the Ennead or the Noetic sphere. But yeah, there's tons of stuff you could do with the tarot. I mean, it's really a portable temple. You can orient yourself and sort of create kind of an axis mundi. I mean, I've used tarot in that sort of capacity before. It's really a neat way to sort of cosmologically ground yourself. You can essentially create a magical circle and do all kinds of like if you look in Solomonic magic, there's always this circle. Sometimes there's a triangle of art, and that moves across the perimeter depending on which direction the demon's coming from, etc. But it's all cosmological stuff. It's all orientation. So I think the best thing, if you're interested in this stuff, again, I wouldn't go to Dion Fortune or anybody like that. I'd go to Miche Eliade, and read something like The Sacred and the Profane, because that's going to straighten you out and cosmologically. That's going to give that's the real stuff, Miche Eliade, Eliade. That book, I mean, top 5 for me, top 5 in my life.
Yeah,
Sacred and the Profane.
It's up there for me. He gave me words for stuff I didn't have words for. Yeah, and I would just add that the way that I read the pips is actually very close to what Jamie was talking about earlier. I use the tarot. I always have, and I didn't realize it till maybe 5 years ago, but I use the tarot in a very sort of Pythagorean or Neo-Pythagorean sort of thing. So the pips for me break down into elemental sort of decads, like tetractys, and 4 of the suits representing the elements, and they really if you wanted to group them Kabbalistically, you could group them as elemental trees, but a lot of times they're just put into the various Sephirot. So if you wanted to find a place where on the tree of life where all these things go, you're working with the tree of Asaya, right? If you have that 4 worlds model of that kind of Jacob's ladder where the 4 interconnected, really 5 interconnected trees, but you have the bottom world, Asaya, and this is kind of what Nick was talking about with the Yod-He Vav-He formula. Asaya would have its own tree. It's kind of like this fractalizing microcosm, macrocosm tree. That's the usefulness of the Kabbalistic system, is that you can do this kind of play with it. And so you'd have a tree of life in Asaya, and then in each one of those Sphirot, right? Keter's 1, aces. Chokmah's 2, 2 pip. Bina's 3 pip. That's the way at least I learned it through the Golden Dawn. But it is very Pythagorean, and it's one system is not right. It's if it's right for you, if it's better for you for what you're doing. Personally, I love the idea of taking those and assigning them to the decans. I think that's brilliant.
Well, yeah, I agree.
And well, I wanted to mention one other thing. I also like that you assign the Keter to the ace, because oftentimes you see the crown appearing there with the suit, but also a yod or a hand, kind of gifting out, giving the element as well, like in a boon kind of way. So I think that's very fitting. Thank you guys both. I appreciate that.
I think Eros Up had an interesting questions here. Why did Porphyry go against whole sign houses, and what do we think about that? So whole sign houses, in case you don't know, it's a house system, so domains of terrestrial action. It's like, one house might be your body, your physique, etc. The second house would be like your belongings, your movable goods. The third house would be like siblings and short trips, etc. All the way around the wheel. The houses are the domains of life in which the zodiacally conditioned planetary sort of essences play out. So she's asking about, why did Porphyry go against whole signs? Because the first quadrant house system was Porphyry houses. So whole signs meant that the signs shared cusps with the houses, that the cusps of the signs were the same as the cusps of the houses. So that's, a lot of people say that's the first house system. That's the old Hellenistic house system. Some people have argued that point, like I forget her name right now, Hedges, I forget her name, but Porphyry houses uses the angles, the ascendant descendant axis and the MCIC axis. I know this is technical stuff, but I'm just trying to answer her question. So and then Porphyry equally divided the angles. He trisected them. So I think he went against that because unless you have angular houses, quadrant houses is what they call them when they're not whole sign, unless you have quadrant houses that recognize the angles as cusps, then you have no micro macro, because the micro is how that's projected on the sphere of the earth. So I think that's why a number of years ago I switched from whole sign to Porphyry houses, because I like to have the projection of the angles on the earth. I think it finishes the picture, actually, instead of just using whole sign where it's like kind of loosey goosey, right? But there's Deborah Holding. That's who made an argument about this. I would read Deborah Holding's Houses and Mansions in the Sky or something. It's called Houses and the Castles in the Sky or something like that. It's her house system book. But if you're interested in that, Deborah Holding with a U, Houlding. And that's the only question I see remaining in here. So
Thank you. That was awesome. Appreciate you answering that, Jamie.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up. We held you guys hostage long enough. No, that was an amazing discussion. I really appreciate it. I think you really helped also, like, for some of my audience, people listening who don't know how detailed this stuff is. I just think you really helped them realize, like, this stuff isn't just spinning around with a crystal in your hand, throwing lavender over your shoulder. There's a little bit more to it than that.
I do that. I do that.
Oh, yeah, I do that. But I really appreciate it. There was a lot of stuff in there that was probably a complete different language to a lot of people listening on audio when it drops. Before we wrap it up, people that are remaining, Headless, would you like to let everybody know what's up with you and where they can find you? You're gonna have to unmute yourself. So there we go.
That preemptively got me. So yeah, you can find me at the Headless Giant on X and on YouTube and on Rumble now. So check me out there. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. And the branch. Going on, sir.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You've been very generous with your time, and I took a lot of notes, so I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Branch. And Jin the Ninja. What's up, sir?
Thank you so much, boss. And like really huge thank you to Jamie and of course Ike. It's always a huge honor to speak to both of you, and I really appreciated that you fielded my questions. It comes from a place of unknowing of the Western traditions, and so I may sometimes misarticulate it, but I'm just looking for comparables or like parallels occurrence. So thank you both so much. I appreciate that. Also, shout out to Matt, of course, Matt Murrah, Joshua the Branch. You did great. I was so proud of you. I was like, oh, he's really been studying. And of course, my co-host for Threshold Saints, Solar, and also the Grey Lodge. And yeah, you can just find me at Threshold Saints. Just dropped an episode with Greg K, Theologia Poetica. So episode 81, Spotify and Apple. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Amazing honor.
Nice. Thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. And Jamie, please let everybody know where they can find all your stuff, whatever you like to promote.
Jamie Paul Lamb at jamiepaullamb.com. Here, I could put it in the chat. But well, no, I can't. I don't know. I'd have to press a bunch of buttons.
I could post it in.
JAIMEPAULLAMB.com. And I do astrology. I have some books and hit me up for one thing I did want to bring up is I have a service that I think is under you. Oh no, that's wrong. JAIME. Like it's like Jaime. But I have a service where I do the sound of your natal chart in a harmonium improvisation, like a 5-minute MP3. I make a 5-minute MP3 of the sound of your natal chart played on a bellows operated reed organ. It's really kind of a cool service that I'm surprised more people don't hit me up about that. It's you hear like through, and I use medieval and Renaissance and some antique correspondences to render that, like the church modes and the planets to notes and the signs and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks so much for having me on, Nick and Headless and everybody, and Jen and the Branch and Ike. Always a pleasure to see you and talk to you. And thanks for everybody who tuned in.
Oh no, thank you, sir. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us again.
Yeah.
And Ike, please let everybody know what's up with you, where they can find all your amazing work.
Sure. IkeBaker.com, IKEBAKER. You've got everything up there from my podcast episodes to some of the YouTube documentary style presentations that I put up. Also, when you go to my page, you can sign up for my I do a newsletter every week, every Thursday, more or less every Thursday. It's completely free. If you want, you just go and sign up for it. Throw your email in the subscription box there. Also, on the bottom right hand corner of my sort of like, I guess, homepage, there's a little chat widget, and anything you write in there will come directly to my inbox. Again, I always say, please be nice. Now Jamie's going to be sending me stuff. He's going to be sending me weird questions, like 3 a.m. I should have waited till he left. But yeah. So if you're interested in I give private instruction and all sorts of things. Magic, alchemy, philosophy,
proctology.
I am a guardian of the anus, and I do group courses too. Right now, I've got one called Music as Magic. We're like dead center in the middle of it. But you can still join if you want to sign up. I did my last class was called Hermetic Kabbalah for practitioners and initiates, and the next one is going to be starting in March. It's actually it's called Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Theurgy. So I'm taking all the stuff that I did in Egypt a couple of months ago with a group of 20 sort of participants and bringing that practical and theoretical stuff. For anybody that's interested, just hit me up on my webpage. You guys are awesome. Thanks for having us on. Thanks for inviting me on too. It was a real treat to be able to sit and talk with you guys, and Jamie, of course. it just hats off, man. You are a brilliant dude, and I love you.
Love you likewise.
No, thank both of you, man. And that was some really great stuff. Like I said before, there was a lot of stuff talked about on here that a lot of I'm sure I went over a lot of people's heads, but I think it really helped prove a point. Like, what this shit is kind of it's not as easy or simple as people think it is. I don't think you can be a fucking idiot if you know what you're doing. So again, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Everybody in the chat, that's what's up. We got Frida RC is in there. We got him coming on next Wednesday as well. We got Georgina Rose coming on at 6 o'clock, and then we got him coming on at 9 o'clock for Nokia and Magic. So Wednesday is gonna be popping off next week. So if you guys are listening, take a look out for that. And again, everybody in the chat, there's a lot of people in there. Eros, thank you for all the questions. It was like you're on the show anyway. I mean, she's one of the members. It was like she was here, but not. So thanks. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.